Míle mágat Alas Ceann Comhairle, and I too want to welcome the campaign to the gallery here tonight and to thank them for all the work that they have done over the years in relation to this. And the fact that they've had to do it, I believe, shows that this building and the people who have been in this building for the last 5 decades have simply not done their job. It is the responsibility of the political establishment, it is the responsibility of the Department of Justice and the Minister for Justice to make sure that the citizens of this country are protected, that they are kept safe, and that if there is an injustice done to them, that there is a proper investigation and that the truth is achieved in relation to that. I also want to thank Fergus Dowd, who has worked on the film as well in relation to this, and I look forward to seeing the film and to gaining a better understanding of the events of the day. I think obviously it goes without saying that the Dublin and Monaghan bombings were the worst single atrocity that happened during the Troubles. They were unique in their severity, and that's in no way to take away from the pain and suffering that has been experienced by anybody else who has lost a loved one during the Troubles. The Dublin and Monaghan bombings destroyed the lives of so many people and damaged radically the survivors and families who were left in their wake. And the emotional damage that was created can't obviously be quantified whatsoever, but it's also important to recognise that many of these families were actually left destitute as a result of what happened to them, that families lost their homes in some circumstances, were made homeless, that other families lost their fathers, who were the breadwinners at the time in their homes. And it's incredible to think that many of these families received absolutely no compensation whatsoever from the state for what's happened to them, and that people in the north of Ireland who have suffered significantly in relation to the horrors of the Troubles have been offered compensation, but this state hasn't seen fit yet to provide a similar compensation for families who have lost so much over the last while. These bombs killed 34 civilians and they injured almost 300 people. There has been no justice, and I think that there's 2 reasons why there has been no justice. The first is that the British state is responsible for the killings of these 34 individuals. The British state murdered these Irish people on the streets of our capital, and the British state does not want the truth to ever come out in relation to that. The British state used the Glenanne gang as a vehicle in relation to the perpetration of these murders. And the Glenanne gang have killed 120 people in Ireland in the 70s and 80s. And I also want to mention tonight Barney O'Dowd, a neighbour of mine who just recently passed away. He survived an attack on his family in 1976, an attack that murdered his 24-year-old son Barry, his 19-year-old son Declan, and also which killed his brother Joe. That attack was carried out by the UVF in tandem with the Glenanne gang on that day, and Barney died just a month ago at the age of 100, and he never received justice or truth for what happened to his family. The British government don't want to see the truth, and they have created the Legacy Act to cover up the truth. And it's important to say that the Legacy Act seeks to allow people get away with murder. That's exactly what it seeks to do. It is the son and the heir of the cover-up and the collusion that happened between the British Army, the RUC, and a host of loyalist terrorist groups in the north of Ireland. It is a unilateral act which undermines the rule of law and the human right to justice, and it makes the British government an outlier internationally. It makes the British government a rogue state internationally, and this act is heaping pain and suffering on those who have suffered so significantly at the hands of the British state for so long. And the British tried to separate themselves, to distance themselves from the murders and the cover-ups that happened in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. But the Legacy Bill locates that cover-up right at the heart of the British establishment. It puts it into Downing Street, because now they are responsible for that cover-up directly in everybody's view at the moment. I also think there's a second barrier for the search for truth in relation to this, and I do think that the Irish state has been a barrier in terms of the search for truth and justice in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. I still cannot believe that this being the worst atrocity of the Troubles that had happened in this state, in our capital and in Monaghan as well, that the state reactions to it were so feeble, so small, so reduced, that there was no effort really in the state to try and get to the truth and justice in this. Incredibly, we have a situation where the Garda investigation was closed down after 10 weeks. And I'm told that, incredibly, that many of the survivors and the people who were there on the day never received a knock on the door from the Gardaí at the time, or were never interviewed in relation to what happened. And that for some people, the first knock on the door of any policeman that happened in relation to that was the knock on the door from John Boucher 4 decades after the event had happened. That an English policeman was the first person to knock on the door of some of the families that lost so much at that time. Now, that's a scandal, so it is. And it's a scandal that points directly to this government. And this government needs to account for that, I believe. Incredibly, Garda files went missing. Forensics were not dealt with in the time that they needed to be dealt with. And that forensics were sent 11 days afterwards to the north of Ireland, which is an incredible situation. And that the existence of those forensics and the whereabouts of those forensics were unknown to people who were meant to be in charge of the investigations. That's a scandal. Now, I understand when Bertie Ahern became Taoiseach, he booked a whole day, to read the Garda files in relation to the Dublin and Monaghan bombings. And I understand it took him 1 hour to actually look at the actual files that exist. That files had gone missing and the files were so low in relation to this is an absolute scandal. That the authorities north and south did not work together, that's a scandal. I cannot believe that happened. And even when you look back at this state's understanding of the Dublin and Monaghan bombings, the fact that it doesn't appear in the school books of this generation is also a scandal as well. It's as if the Dublin and Monaghan bombings is buried in the consciousness of official Ireland at the moment. Nearly 30 years of ministers have gone by. Ministers for Justice have existed since that bombing. And I believe that when the families went to meet some of those ministers for justice, the response of those ministers for justice was, if you find any more information, come back to us. Those government ministers should have been the engine to seek the information for those families. They should have been the energy to search for the justice in relation to that. And the fact that we have words here tonight, and after so many motions have been passed in this, without the actions, speaks volumes, I think, to the people of Ireland and also to the survivors of that horrendous day. I also would just want to say that, I do believe that there has been an airbrushing of this issue by official Ireland. I don't believe that official Ireland has pushed this issue with the British government with regards the level of energy that is necessary to achieve justice. And I would really ask the government to focus on that. In terms of funding, and I mentioned earlier how some of the families were left destitute in relation to this, previous governments actually pulled funding from the campaign group. And today the funding is achieved through the Pat Finucane Centre, so the money must go north first and then come back south to the families, which again shows the complete lack of logic in relation to this. So I would ask for the government to start to focus on this issue in the level of sincerity and effort and realism that this issue demands. That this issue is a unique issue. It is a shocking human tragedy where one state murders the citizens of another state. And the responsibility of this state is to defend its citizens, to protect its citizens, and to make sure that there's justice achieved. And I would really ask the government not just to provide words tonight, not just to go through the motions tonight, but to set itself a task of forcing the British government to seek justice here. And I would also go further than that. Given the fact that we have never properly investigated this, given the fact that the government did not do its duty, given that fact that so many families were left on their own to deal with this, I would ask the government to apologise to the families here tonight for not doing their job historically, for not supporting their families historically, for not investigating what happened properly, and for leaving the families to do all this work by themselves. Gurb Magat.